I'm going to introduce to you the group and the theme, and we're so enthusiastic, 4 of us came over from Edinburgh. We only have a short time, so you'll have to excuse us flying through the territory. I'm going to start by giving you some context and some background about Edinburgh and the theme. I'll also point out that we come armed with a paper we've just published in AI Matters, and there's copies over there, so please grab a copy. So this is a position paper for the research theme that we're developing, AI Matters. And we're a new group, but our first foray into the real world launches in August, and we'll hear more about this at the end from Larissa. This is one of the AI Lab Lighthouse Residencies. I think we've got another one being presented in this same session. There's one a year, and that's with Ars Electronica, and we're also working with Edinburgh International Festival on that. So, Edinburgh, I'm new there. It's a great place to be. One of the significant things about Edinburgh is Edinburgh was one of the first 2 places in the world to work on AI. So in the early 60s, there was Stanford and Edinburgh. So it's got a very long and proud history, and now there's a very strong community, a very large and strong community working on AI. There's a number of groups which we represent variously, informatics, Bayes Centre, the Robotarium, as well as new institutes which I'll come on to today. And the other thing that Edinburgh's principally known for is festivals. It's often referred to as the world's foremost festival city. It hosts the world's largest city and some very significant ones. And that sort of conceptual space, AI and festivals, makes it a very fertile space for what we hope to do over the coming years. Part of the context as well is that there's a new program that's a very large 15-year program of data-driven innovation, and that's setting up a number of new institutes. One of these is where I'm based, and we're all linked, called the Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we're taking over this building, which is the old Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, so a historic building, a much-loved building, and well, our kind of mission there is to prepare for unknown futures, but it builds on some really interesting history as well. It was the home of Florence Nightingale, who, as you'll know, is a really significant pioneer in statistics, in visualization, the ones up there of the Crimean War, I'm sure many of you will recognize. So there's some amazing history there, as well as some very strong links into the city. So into this space of data, of futures, of festivals, we're bringing art. And just to position that, the last project, or one of the last projects that I initiated, is happening this summer at Manchester International Festival. And this is a new commission by Raphael Lozana-Hemmer. He describes it as the most ambitious work he's done to date. It's currently under construction. I won't have time to go into that. It's a work based on Babbage's concept that we can replay every sound ever created by rewinding the movements of air at a molecular level. And this is what we want to do in Edinburgh, which is to champion and enable world-class, significant artistic works. But experiential AI is fundamentally, it's a a research program that connects between science and art. And the premise for this, or one of the premises, is building on new materialism, the idea that an artwork is an apparatus for reconfiguring and reordering the world. And what we ask in Experiential AI is, can artists reorder algorithms, data, and situations to open possibilities for radically new concepts and paradigms? And that's our challenge. That's what we're aiming to do, what we hope to do, our ambition. And when we talk about new concepts, we hope for art, but we hope to create a real dialogue with science, with society as well, where new concepts can come in to address a number of key challenges. You'll be familiar with these, I think, but there are a number of really quite foundational challenges in AI, machine learning, robotics, such as that algorithms are not legible, they're not transparent, they're invisible, and they're difficult to understand or impossible to comprehend, even for the people creating them. The logic of correlation can amplify harmful bias, and there have been many cases of that. And also agency. People rarely have agency or are unable to engage with algorithms on their own terms. So these are some of the themes that we set out to tackle. I'm going to hand over to Vijak in the first instance. And what we're going to do today is really present to you the background to Experiential AI. Experiential AI is a new theme. It's launched with that paper and a residency in a month or two. At the moment, today, we're going to really present to you the background, looking at a number of key themes, responding to those challenges. So legibility, morality, and autonomy. And then in Vijak, Dave, and Larissa, you're going to hear different perspectives on that. Perspective of designing algorithms, perspective of creating with algorithms, and also about the algorithmic imaginary. So, over to Vijak.
Thank you, Drew. As Drew mentioned, I'm faculty at the School of Informatics. So the work we do is mostly on the technical level, but increasingly we have been sort of concerned about how AI impacts society. So we tackle a couple of key themes here, and this connects back to what Drew mentioned, one of which is explainability. And you can see this as a way to empower people to use algorithms. But the second two notions are kind of a reflection of us, and I'll make that clear. The notion of value alignment and fairness. And kind of the key theme when we try to develop technical solutions is to think in terms of how humans can be embedded in the process of creating these algorithms, potentially providing input and extracting information. You'll see instances of this as I talk about. This is joint work with many people at the lab. I'm happy to give you more references in case you're interested. So just to put this in context, there's been a huge focus on explainable AI, and one of the reasons this has come up is mainly because algorithms are being used everywhere, and often people don't understand what's going on. And sort of if you see this map, right, there are different kinds of techniques. They map out to this kind of notional scale of explainability, and what's really interesting is that you have some algorithms that are super high in prediction accuracy, like deep learning, but on the other hand, they're not really explainable. So why do we care, right? A good example why you should care is often it can happen that when you train these algorithms, the data you train it on is very different from the data you use it on. So for instance, there's been cases where Google Photos has wrongly categorized people of color as animals because the only data set they train it on is on Caucasian people. right? So these are the reasons why you want to sometimes extract explanations. So what we've been looking at is our various ways where we can embed some kind of common sense into algorithms. So here's an example where a classical object recognition systems, like the ones you see outside, typically tell you the objects in the scene. Right now you see these two boxes. What's happening is that the person is putting the box inside another box, right? So at one point, the only thing the system really sees is just this one big box. But of course, we as people observing this understand that the box is inside another box. So by embedding these very simple rules about transitive insideness, you typically get these algorithms to understand that the box is inside the other box. Right? So a notion of common sense emerges. Another kind of example we've been looking at is how we could help in education. Right? Often students struggle with, when they're trying to prepare themselves for big examinations, you kind of want to understand the decision logic of how to answer questions. And these kinds of questions, right, typically come up in most of your high school exams. So what we do in this case is we find a way to parse these questions, convert them to a kind of program where the student can look at it and sort of understand what are the decision steps that's needed to actually get at the answer. What can I change and what kind of calculations are needed, right? So it gives insight into the logic of these problems. We've also looked at a number of ways to actually help people dealing with data, because often people have struggled to understand what's inside this data. So we've come up with a number of unsupervised algorithms that kind of give a representation of what the data is saying. In this case, looking at student data, you kind of know how students struggle when they take courses of different difficulty, right? So this gives you insight about how you could potentially change your courses. So these were, steps we took in terms of engaging with the algorithms. I'll kind of give you another perspective on trying to understand, can algorithms tell us something about ourselves? So you might have seen this figure before. This is called as the infamous trolley problem, and it's a very vexing problem. Basically, the idea is that you have a train that's going on a track, okay? On its way, it will potentially kill 5 people, but you are this person close to the lever, and you can pull the lever, and you could sidetrack the train and kill only 1 person. Right? The question is, what would you do in this situation, right? And the idea why this problem is coming up now is self-driving cars are being discussed as being deployed in cities, and we can imagine that, for instance, if they're going out in the city, a child walks into the road, what should it do? Essentially swerve the car, potentially risking the lives of the passengers, or potentially end up hitting the child. Right? So there are very difficult problems that come up. And the kind of thing that we were interested in doing is, what would it look for an AI system to deal with these kinds of situations? And it made us do some hard choices, right? One of the hard choices was we were forced to assign a number to human lives. And this looks extremely controversial, right? But surprisingly, this is something that people do all the time in insurance companies, train service companies, and plane companies. It's called the quality value of life. Essentially, how do you measure how many times you need to service a train so that you save people's lives, right? So people are taking these kinds of decisions. It's not supposed to be a prescriptive framework, but it's to try and understand a shared computational framework for understanding the engagement between humans and agents. And what we come up with is a kind of system that reflects the moral principles of the democracy, okay? So to just sort of show what this looks like, this is a case where we surveyed people in various situations. For instance, what happens if the second track has 1 person, 5 people, has a pet, has members of your family? And what would you do? Would you potentially consider sacrificing yourself? So these are difficult questions, right? And often you see that these kinds of agents actually do capture the moral preferences of a culture or a community. Of course, this is different from culture to culture, and trying to understand these nuances is one of the aspects why this becomes so exciting and interesting. Kind of another thing where, the algorithms are often criticized quite heavily for being unfair, but this is an analysis on a data set, okay? So what you see on the right is the number of applicants who applied for credit, and you can see that the number of men is considerably higher than the number of women, but as it turns out, people have labeled women as being more likely to default on these loans even though the proportion is considerably lower. So this is historical data, nothing to do with algorithms, right? So what we're trying to do is trying to understand what does it mean to make an algorithm fair? What kind of measures would help us prevent this? And of course, there's one thing you could do. You could penalize people who have gotten a higher preference, but that seems wrong, right? Penalization is a weird way to tackle fairness. So there are some fundamental ideas where I think potentially art and social science can inform us about what is the right thing to do. And even though this is in the context of us taking these decisions, algorithms can inform us, right, about various preferences that we and biases that we ourselves hold. So to kind of put this in towards an end, so automated decision making is very useful, but a number of complex themes emerge when you start using algorithms. And I often think sometimes when you try to build these systems, it kind of tells you what kind of biases you hold as a society, right? And it's kind of informative about what we can do about that. So I think there's a rich space to potentially look at how we can look at alignment between humans and machines, and what kind of principles do we as a community or a society want to embed in them. Thanks very much, and I'll hand over to Dave.
Thanks, Vaishak. So I'm Dave Meyer. I also work in the University of Edinburgh. I'm interested in interagencies. So how does agency work between people and the things around us that are becoming ever more intelligent and ever more animate? And for me, this started in my PhD, where I was trying to create AI algorithms that were equal partners in musical improvisation, that could understand what we were doing and respond to it, not necessarily in the way that humans do, but in a way that was musically useful at the time. I'm going to talk about 3 projects, which is probably 2 projects too many for a short slot, but we'll see how we go. The first one is really, it's not art, and it's not quite AI. So please pardon me for that, but it's a slightly critical design take on the algorithms that surround us. So every time we communicate online, it's visible to an ever-growing set of people. There's the people we actually want to talk to. There's then often our close friends, our slightly further away friends, and a growing collection of shadowy figures, some of which are human, some of which are algorithmic, some of which are 3-letter agencies in the United States, and they all make sense of our communication in different ways, and they parse what we're doing, and they make judgments about us. And so this is an example of algorithms that are completely impenetrable. I have no idea who or what is reading things that I post on Facebook. So this project is about what happens if we bring algorithms onto our side instead. So if we shift the agency and make the algorithms our allies, and in this case, get them to help us tell the little white lies that everyone tells to smooth life over a little bit. And we do this by creating synthetic screenshots, so programs that don't exist, but they let us imagine what life would be like if we had an activity tracker that, rather than being completely honest about where we are, could pretend that we're living a healthy lifestyle. And if I'm in the pub, it says I'm actually in the yoga studio downstairs. So I can make use of all the location services that Google provides, but still actually live the way that I want to live without my behavior being modified. Or the one on the right generates plausible calendar appointments. So no one can book you for a meeting unless you say, actually, no, I am free. That meeting was in there by accident. So terrible robots for plausible deniability. The next one is a bit more about what happens when algorithms come into the physical world. I'm going to show a video. You may recognize the floor on this because we showed it about 100 yards that way a few years ago. This is a small robot society called the Lichtsuchende, the light seekers, and they're loosely modeled on sunflowers. They sense light and they respond by turning to look at it. So they have a very strong sense of attention. They can do something sunflowers can't, which is they can also send out beams of light. And this forms the basis of their society and their communication. And it also gives them a very nice way to interact with people, because we can send human beings in there with torches to go and play with them and see what happens. Is that 3 minutes? Wow, okay. But the interesting bit for me is what happened at the beginning and what happened as the project developed. So this is one of the very first moments where I had just 4 light sensors, 2 servo motors, some toothpicks and glue, and it's running the most simple algorithm possible. If the sensor on the right has more light, then it turns in that direction. If the one on the left has more light, it turns that way. But suddenly, by being physical, we start to read it with a bit of personality, with a bit of responsiveness, and it gets some character. And we look into how we can enhance and support that character and help these things grow as creatures. The next moment happened when we had several of them together. When they come close together, they start doing this slightly strange ritualistic dance. We didn't program that in. We didn't expect it. We know, or I knew when I made it, that it's just an algorithm overshooting and coming back on itself. But it reads as territory, as defensiveness, as a display of aggression. And so that led us into saying, right, let's give these things a psychology. Let's import some ideas from theory into them, which led into thinking, how do we manage animate creatures that we're designing? We had an idea that we were just trying to support their development, but actually it's a bit more nuanced than that. And there's times when we listen to them, there's times when we program them to do certain things. And in the end, we look at the society and try and understand what are the imaginaries, what are the ways that they work together that we didn't expect them to do, and see how we can support them. And I've spoken for too long, so I'm going to entirely skip my next project and hand over to Larissa.
Great. We are doing some pachacuchas here, as you might have seen. So, as Olga said, I'm an interaction designer working at the University of Edinburgh. And my work is particularly focused on how people perceive algorithms and autonomous systems more specifically. And I like to think that, I like this definition of imaginaries, because imaginaries can be something very individual, but it also portrays something that is shared, is characteristic of our society. So I like this definition that imaginaries are patterned convocations of the social whole. And they are pre-reflexive parameters which reflect this idea of what is the global, the national, what is moral and what is not moral. Also, I think it's important to mention that there are different levels of autonomy, from your email that operates autonomously, trying to guess what you're going to say, to this vision of distributed autonomous societies, right? We are a little bit far away from this vision, but we are somewhere in this continuum from moving towards machines that have more autonomy. This presents a couple of challenges. As Drew mentioned, one of the challenges is that this technology is invisible, and is invisible because it operates in the background. It is also invisible because we are very familiar with the actions that we take, with the way we operate with technology. So as things change, we tend to map our existing mental models or habitual tendencies to new technologies. And it's also it's hard to explore these imaginaries and conceptions around autonomous systems because there is a lack of conceptual space for collective problem solving and decision making. So I'm going to show two projects if you have time. The first one is about energy and imaginaries around algorithms in energy transactions. So when you think about energy, we tend to think about national grids that are centralized and very heavily controlled and regulated. But there are new models of energy systems that are based on algorithms, blockchains, and smart contracts that allow for new models of ownership. And also new ways of using and sharing energy and acting on this infrastructure. So for example, priors can, or batteries in your smart cars can, you can use these batteries to distribute energy, not only consume energy. So in the same way that these cars can store energy and we distribute energy, we worked on a concept based on hair dryers. That was a project for the European Union, the Policy Lab, where we wanted to explore tensions behind blockchain and autonomous systems and smart contracting. So we designed 3 hair dryers that show different models of ownership. So if you think about the hairdryer transacting energy with the grid in the same way that electric cars can do, you can think that there are smart contracts regulating these transactions. And then you think about who's going to own the profit and the losses behind these transactions. It could be the final consumer, so the final consumer will have more control behind that. Or it could be the company. So the company gives the hairdryer for free and a profit from this transaction. So your relationship with your hairdryer would change according to who is operating these algorithms. And then the third model, perhaps a third party could own these transactions and or define these transactions and own the profit and benefits behind that. So based on that, we show, we hired different actors to improvise based on these hairdryers. They work, they're working prototypes. I think I'm going to skip the video because it's quite tight on time. But they're quite funny, and the videos were made to engage people in conversations around policy and autonomous systems, mostly blockchain transactions. Another project that I'm going to just mention really quickly is Abbott Barista is a coffee machine that operates autonomously. And the idea is that the machine is relatively, it's about 3 years old now, the project, but it shows data about producers around the world, and you can pay coffee with your Bitcoin wallet. It's a very rich coffee machine at the moment. It wasn't that rich at the time, but it regulates autonomously, so it has a set of functions that allows it to pay people to carry out small services like repairs and refill with water and coffee. Just talking a little bit more about what is the residency that we want to offer as a group. So as Drew mentioned, there will be a series of residencies coming up in the future. At the moment, we have one available, which is the Lighthouse Residency. And the aim of this residency is, first of all, to develop early-stage concepts for new artistic work that challenges machine learning algorithms, what they are and how they are used. The second objective is to test these novel approaches to dispel the mystery of algorithms and make their mechanisms more apparent. And then the third concept is, of course, to explore new concepts for ethical and responsible AI. And this residency is a partnership between Ars Electronica, the Edinburgh International Festival, and us representing the Edinburgh Futures Institute, the Base Center, the Informatics, School of Informatics, the Data Ethics Center, and the Heriot Watt Robotarium. So all these academic institutions in Edinburgh. So the benefits of this residency is there will be an artist fee of 10K, also 5K to cover living costs, access to AI scientists like Bajak's group and ethicists, other people involved in this initiative. Also access to curators at Edinburgh festivals and technical support, data sets and technologies, etc., depending on the concept. Finally, the timeline. So the call for artists will be launched at the Edinburgh International Festival and Ars Electronica in August this year. And the residency will take place in winter next year. Also in spring next year, the production will start in Linz. And the work will be presented both at the Edinburgh International Festival and Ars Electronica. Thank you. Do you want to say some closing words? Yeah, come on.
Thanks, Larissa. I think we're out of time. So, are we out of time? Yeah. Well, let's come up and we can answer any questions. We'd be particularly interested, because we haven't announced the call for artists, in any feedback or thoughts or questions about the call for artists. That'd be quite handy. Otherwise, yeah, we invite your questions. Thank you.
So I was particularly interested in the FAIR algorithms you mentioned, and I was wondering whether you could also share some details about the corporational frameworks you operate in, and whether we might soon experience some even more fair algorithms out there.
Want to share that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the paper. I guess one of the things we were meaning to do is essentially precisely for this call to try and understand how these two things link. So at the moment, the main issue with the literature is that they often have these definitions of fairness and they expect people to just sort of obey them. And we sort of agree that that's too limiting and not nuanced enough. And one of the things we're trying to do is to try and see how can we put this in context. But I'm happy to share the paper with you, certainly. And then, the idea would be to take it further with the artistry.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think this is evident from the presentation, but we're particularly interested in artists who are interested to challenge the algorithms, to explore their social context. And there's a number of concepts that we're very interested in. Fairness is one key high-level theme that we're very interested in. And as Larissa mentioned, this residency is just our first activity. Other activities we're developing are also very much focused on some of these really key issues around how algorithms interface with society. And our ambition is to set this up in a way so that some of the insights that we arrive at together through collaboration from artists, as artists, can have a real voice and shape research, but also implementation and policy. So, on the one hand, we hope we get some really great artworks, but we hope that we can have some impact from this work as well.
Thanks for the talk. My question would be about the long-term plans with the artworks and the results of the residency.
Yeah, so for not only this residency, but the first residencies we're running, we are, well, I'll be concrete. With the first residency, we have an agreement with Edinburgh International Festival to exhibit outcomes, but we're being very clear that these are not expected to be realized works. It could be a talk, it could be an artifact, work in progress. The real objective for the residency is development, artistic development and research interaction. So that's important to say there. In terms of the longer term, and if I focus on the artistic side, I used to run an arts organisation, but we now together are not an arts organisation, we're research-based. So we're going to be working in partnership a lot. In Edinburgh, there's actually a number of different festivals, and so we're setting this programme up in collaboration with festivals, and we'll probably work with different festivals over the years. And in terms of sort of formal commissioning, that will be done through those partnerships. The University of Edinburgh does have a collection, and I anticipate, well, commissions that we lead on would contribute to that collection. But by the nature of much digital work, and in Edinburgh, there's a very strong emphasis on performance as well. So probably many of the commissions will be done with the festivals. Does that answer the question? Yeah. There's a microphone.
What do you mean if you take the word of artistic, you are dealing with the artistical part? What does that mean, artistical for you?
Wow, how long do we have? That's a question that can be answered in many ways. I'll answer it from my perspective. We actually are approaching this as an art-science collaboration, and we want to support art as artists. So we don't want artists to be in the service of research, but equally we have quite an open understanding of art and artists. Many of the practitioners in our field, and probably in this room, work across boundaries between art and technology, art and design. You've seen here we have artists and designers and scientists. So in terms of the fields represented, I imagine it will be artists and design and quite a broad field of creative practice. But I'm not sure if that's how you wanted me to answer that question.
You are right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, then let's thank the Experiential AI team.